Bob Dylan lowered his guitar. He turned to the band and said one word. Stop. The arena, 12,000 people, fell into complete silence. No one expected what came next when they heard that name. Madison Square Garden. November 1997. The never-ending tour had been rolling for 9 years straight. Cities blurred together. Venues became interchangeable. Dylan was 66 years old, his voice weathered like old wood, his face carved with decades of living under the weight of being called the voice of a generation, a title he'd spent 40 years trying to escape. The setlist that night was typical. Standards from the catalog. Tangled Up in Blue. Don't Think Twice. The band knew the songs by muscle memory. The audience knew them too, every word, every pause, every harmonica break. But something was different tonight. Dylan stood center stage under a single spotlight, his acoustic guitar slung across his body. The opening chords of Not Dark Yet had just begun. The band was locked in, drummer keeping steady time, bassist walking the progression, guitarist adding texture. Dylan's mouth moved toward the microphone. And then he heard it. A voice from the darkness. Somewhere in the first 10 rows. Not a shout. Not a scream. Just a name, spoken with enough clarity to cut through the opening bars of music. Warren. Dylan's fingers stopped moving on the fretboard. The note hung in the air, then died. His head turned slightly, not toward the voice, but inward, like he was listening to something only he could hear. He lifted his right hand. Palm up. The universal gesture. Stop. The band stopped. Drums faded mid-beat. Bass note dissolved. The 12,000 people who had been swaying, singing along, living inside the familiar groove of a Bob Dylan concert suddenly found themselves sitting in absolute silence. Dylan lowered his guitar until it hung loose against his hip. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't explain. He just stood there under that spotlight, shadows pooling around him, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. 30 seconds passed. In a concert venue, 30 seconds of silence feels like an hour. Someone in the audience coughed. Another person shifted in their seat. But no one spoke. No one called out. There's a difference between silence and silence. Everyone in Madison Square Garden that night understood they were experiencing the latter. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. To understand what happened in that moment, you need to understand what happened 34 years earlier, in a small folk club in Greenwich Village, when Bob Dylan was still Bobby Zimmerman and the weight of history hadn't yet found his shoulders. 1963, the Gaslight Cafe. Dylan was 22 years old, playing 3 sets a night for $12 and free coffee. He was good, everyone knew he was good, but he wasn't Bob Dylan yet. That transformation was still months away, still waiting in the grooves of an album that would redefine American music. He shared the bill that month with other folks, other kids with guitars and dreams. Most of them faded. Their names lost to time, their songs forgotten, their faces erased from the collective memory of a scene that would eventually mythologize itself into something it never quite was. One of those faces belonged to Warren Haynes. Not the Warren Haynes who would later become a guitar legend with the Allman Brothers and Government Mule. Different Warren. Different story. This Warren Haynes was a folk singer from Philadelphia, 24 years old, with a voice like worn leather and lyrics that cut straight to the bone. Dylan and Warren became friends the way musicians do. Through cigarettes shared between sets, through late-night diners where coffee was a currency and conversation was an art form, through the unspoken understanding that they were both chasing something they couldn't name, but would die trying to catch. Warren was better than Dylan. At least at first. He had the voice. He had the stage presence. He had the songs. Original compositions that made people lean forward in their chairs, made them forget their drinks, made them feel like they were hearing something true in a world that trafficked mostly in lies. Dylan knew it. Everyone knew it. You're going to make it, Dylan told him one night, 3 in the morning, sitting on the curb outside the Gaslight, while sanitation trucks rumbled past. "You've got it. That thing. I can hear it." Warren lit a cigarette, smiled that tired smile of someone who'd heard promises before. "Maybe. But you're going to make it bigger. You've got something else." "Something?" He gestured with the cigarette trailing smoke. "I don't know. Hunger, maybe. Like you're trying to outrun something." "I'm not running from anything. I didn't say from. I said something. There's a difference." 3 months later, Dylan recorded The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, the album that changed everything. Blowin' in the Wind, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. Songs that would define a generation, become anthems, turn Bobby Zimmerman into Bob Dylan, into an icon, into a mythology, into a weight he'd carry for the rest of his life. Warren Haynes was still playing the Gaslight for $12 a night. They stayed friends for a while. Dylan would call when he was in New York. They'd meet at the old spots, talk about music, about the scene, about the way things were changing. But the distance was growing. Not emotional distance, something else. The distance between someone who history had chosen and someone who history had passed by. In 1965, Dylan went electric. Newport Folk Festival. The moment everyone remembers. The moment that split folk music in two. Pete Seeger allegedly tried to cut the power cables with an axe. The audience booed. Dylan walked off stage and into legend. Warren Haynes was in the crowd that night. He watched his friend, his better, his peer, his fellow traveler, become something unreachable. Something that belonged to the world now, not to late-night diners and shared cigarettes. They stopped talking after that. Not because of anger. Not because of jealousy. Just because the distance had become too wide to cross with phone calls and promises to stay in touch. Warren kept playing. Small clubs. Regional circuits. He made enough money to survive, not enough to thrive. He wrote songs that deserved to be heard and weren't. He grew older in the shadows while Dylan grew older in spotlights. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. In 1987, Warren Haynes was diagnosed with lung cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months. He didn't try to reach out to Dylan. What would he say? "Remember me? We used to be friends before you became Bob Dylan and I stayed Warren Haynes?" There was no bitterness in the decision not to call. Just acceptance. Just the understanding that some distances can't be crossed, even by old friendship. Warren died 4 months later, in a Philadelphia hospital, surrounded by family Dylan had never met. He was 58 years old. His obituary ran in the Philadelphia Inquirer, 3 paragraphs, middle of page 17. Warren Haynes, local folk musician. Dylan never knew. No one told him. Why would they? Warren had long since faded from the folk scene Dylan had left behind decades earlier. They hadn't spoken in over 20 years. The connection existed only in history, in memories of a club that had closed and a scene that had dissolved and conversations that no one else had witnessed. Until November 1997. Madison Square Garden. When someone in the darkness spoke that name. Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. The silence in the arena stretched. Dylan stood motionless under his spotlight, guitar hanging loose, his face hidden beneath shadow and hat brim. Finally, he stepped back from the microphone. He turned to his band, musicians who'd played with him for years, who knew his signals, who could read the weight of his silences. "Take 5, Dylan said quietly. His voice wasn't amplified, but the arena was so quiet that people in the back rows swore they could hear him. The band exchanged glances. This wasn't standard. They were in the middle of a show. 12,000 people were watching. But they put down their instruments and walked off stage. Dylan remained. He reached up and removed his guitar, setting it carefully on its stand. Then he did something he rarely did. He addressed the audience directly. "Warren Haynes," he said into the microphone. His voice was rougher than usual, abraded by decades of cigarettes and touring and singing songs that required pieces of his soul. Someone just said that name. Warren Haynes. He paused. Looked out into the darkness where 12,000 faces he couldn't see were looking back. I knew Warren, Dylan continued. Long time ago. Before all this. He gestured vaguely at the stage, at the arena, at the machinery of fame surrounding him. Warren was a better singer than me. Better songwriter, probably. Had this way of making you feel like he was telling you a secret. Just you. No one else. Someone in the audience began to clap. Dylan raised his hand, the same stopping gesture from earlier. Don't, he said simply. This isn't, just listen. The clapping died. Warren never made it. Not the way people mean when they say someone made it. He played clubs. He wrote songs. He did what we all said we wanted to do before we learned that doing it and succeeding at it are two different animals. And I went one way, and he went another way, and I didn't. I should have. Dylan stopped. Looked down at his boots. When he looked back up, his eyes were somewhere else entirely. Someone told me tonight, before the show, backstage, that Warren died. 10 years ago. Lung cancer. And I didn't know. No one told me. Or maybe someone tried and it didn't reach me through all the... He gestured again at the machinery. Through all the noise. The arena was absolutely still. This wasn't a performance. This was something else. Something raw and unrehearsed and desperately human. Warren wrote a song, Dylan said. Back in '63, I think. He only played it a few times. Called it The Unsung. About all the people who do the work, who live the life, who chase the thing, but whose names never get remembered. I told him it was depressing. He said it wasn't about depression. It was about truth. About bearing witness. Dylan walked back to his guitar stand. Picked up the instrument. Settled the strap over his shoulder. I don't remember all the words, he said. But I remember enough. He began to play. Not dark yet. The song they'd been starting when the voice called out that name. Something else. Something older. Chord progressions that sounded like they'd been carved from wood that predated modern music. His voice when he sang was different, softer, more careful, like he was handling something fragile. The lyrics were simple. Verses about unnamed singers and unnamed clubs. About songs that deserved to be anthems but ended up as whispers. About the distance between deserving recognition and receiving it. About all the Warren Hayneses of the world who did the work and got forgotten. Dylan didn't sing it perfectly. He forgot lines, hummed through verses he couldn't recall, stopped and restarted twice. It didn't matter. Perfection wasn't the point. When he finished, he set the guitar back down. Looked out into the darkness. That was Warren's song, he said. Not mine. I'm just passing it along. Because someone should. Because he deserved that much. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. Dylan didn't return to the original set list. He played 3 more songs, all covers, all old folk standards, all songs that Warren Haynes might have played in that Gaslight Cafe 34 years ago. He played them simply, with no embellishment, no Dylan mystique, just the bones of the melodies and the truth of the lyrics. The band eventually came back on stage, but they played quietly, respectfully, following Dylan's lead into something that felt more like a memorial service than a concert. When the show ended, there was no encore. Dylan set down his guitar, tipped his hat toward the audience, and walked off stage. The house lights came up. 12,000 people filed out in near silence, like they'd just witnessed something sacred that required processing before discussion. Backstage, Dylan asked his tour manager to find Warren Haynes' family. It took 3 days, but they found Warren's sister living in Philadelphia. Dylan called her himself. I should have been there, he said. I should have known. I'm sorry. Warren's sister was quiet for a moment. Then, he never expected you to be there, He used to say you had your road and he had his. He was proud of you. He never stopped being your friend. Dylan sent money for a proper headstone. On it, at his request, they carved a single line from The Unsung. Some voices echo. Others just sing. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Dylan never recorded Warren's song. Never played it again publicly. But musicians who were in Madison Square Garden that night remember. They tell the story. They keep Warren's name alive in the way Warren himself would have appreciated. Quietly, between people who understand that history isn't just made by the ones who get remembered. Bob Dylan is a legend. Warren Haynes is a footnote. But on one November night in 1997, Dylan made sure that footnote got read aloud. That's the real power. Not the voice. Not the songs. Not the fame. The power to stop. To remember. To bear witness.